Welcome to 9 News Plus. I'm Aaron Adelson. Last week, a Colorado high school teacher died after it's believed she was infected by bacterial meningitis. Eaglecrest High School canceled classes the next day while health officials identified anyone who was in close contact with that teacher. Another educator at that school also died. Her cause of death has not been identified. We're now joined by 9 News health expert Dr. Payal Kohli. Dr. Kohli, what is bacterial meningitis?
You know, Aaron, I was shocked to hear this news because Eaglecrest is actually my alma mater. I'm an alum of Eaglecrest, and bacterial meningitis can be a very significant and severe illness where you have inflammation or infection of the meninges. So meningitis is inflammation of the meninges, which is the sac around the brain and around the spinal cord. And it can very rapidly progress to cause death, actually, because the bacteria can obviously get into the bloodstream, but it can also have effects on the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, cause confusion, cause coma, cause fever and stiff neck, cause headaches, and cause you to need a breathing tube if it's not treated rapidly with antibiotics.
That's extremely concerning. What's the appropriate level of fear people in that community should have?
You know, I'm concerned, but I'm also optimistic. And the reason for that is because in order to spread, bacterial meningitis caused by Meningocoxemia, which is the most common organism that causes it, you really have to have prolonged close contact. Usually we see it in people who are, spouses or kissing partners with oral secretions being shared, people who live in the same household and maybe sharing dishes and such, roommates, that type of contact. Casual contact is less likely to spread it. It's not as contagious as a flu or a cold. Having said that, I do think it's a really good idea that Eaglecrest is, using antibiotic prophylaxis on all the close contacts. That means actually treating them with antibiotic to even prevent the bacteria from sort of getting hold in the nervous system.
If someone believes maybe they haven't been contacted by if they believe they could be a contact, what should they be doing?
I think talk to your doctor right away about whether it makes sense for you to get those prophylactic antibiotics, because time is everything in terms of prognosis. We know that this condition can be very severe. In fact, even with treatment, it can see a mortality rate of 10 to 15%. So hopefully you're in one of those categories of the people who get the antibiotics early, they can recover. But even the people that recover and don't die can have long-term neurological consequences or long-term complications of being in the intensive care unit with this really aggressive, disease.
That mortality rate sounds high. Could you put that into context for people, maybe compared to COVID or another illness that we're familiar with?
I mean, it's extremely high because you usually talk about things killing less than 1% of people. And now you're talking 10 to 15% of people, despite treatment, dying from this. So, it's concerning, especially because it's an infectious disease and it can spread through those respiratory droplets. Now, depending on what's causing the meningitis, it can also spread through other ways, such as contaminated food, for example. And this is all kind of what we're talking about, bacterial meningitis. I also want to be clear, Aaron, that there's many different types of meningitis. So remember, the meninges is inflammation, the sac around the brain and the spinal cord. It can happen from a virus. It can happen from cancer. If cancer invades that sac, it can cause inflammation of it. It can happen from certain medications. It can happen from conditions like lupus or other autoimmune conditions where the immune system kind of freaks out and starts attacking that sac around the brain and the spinal cord. So meningitis is more of an umbrella term. Bacterial meningitis is one of those, subsets of meningitis. And then the specific ones that can progress very quickly are what we're calling meningocoxemia, which is caused by that specific organism.
Typically in a year, how many cases do we see in Colorado per year?
It's pretty rare. And that's one of the reasons it's gotten our attention because, in young, healthy people, we really shouldn't be seeing a ton of meningitis. Now, I remember when I was a trainee, it would be every few weeks we would get somebody in the ICU with meningitis, but that was in the setting of being in a high-volume academic center where everyone from the community sort of sends to you. So in a regular community like ours, we really shouldn't be seeing, certainly not multiple cases in the same area. That's concerning. But I'm very curious about what happened to that other teacher, if it was the same sort of illness or something else, because to me, if it was the same, then we really do need to do more aggressive contact tracing, not just for that first teacher, but even potentially the second one and all of, his or her contacts.
Yeah, I know at last check, the coroner's office said they were doing further testing to try to evaluate that cause of death. Is there anything we're not asking that you think people should know?
Prevention is key. So vaccination is really critical here. Now remember I said there's many different types of meningitis, so we only have a vaccine against a few of the bacterial meningitis. So it's not a guarantee when you get the vaccine that you're never ever going to get meningitis, but because it is such a significant severe illness, and because it's preventable, the vaccine works really well. It's important to make sure that you're vaccinated. So usually babies get vaccinated. The CDC also recommends preteens, they kind of age 11 to 12, get vaccinated and then get a booster a few years later. And if you're an adult and you're not sure if you've been vaccinated, then you need to talk to your doctor about it. And adults that are high risk for exposures because they live in close quarters, such as prisons or college dorms or what have you, they may need to even just go ahead and get a booster anyways. But really the vaccine is one of the best tools that we have for prevention of this critical illness.
Is there an age range of anyone could get it if they have not received it?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I would encourage that. And of course, if for any reason you're immunocompromised, your immune system's turned off, your risk of exposure is really high, or you've been exposed to somebody, that's all the more reason to call up your doctor and talk about that.
On a cursory search, I was having a hard time finding data on the vaccine rates in Colorado. I don't know if you can speak to that specific to this meningitis.
It's really become an initiative for many schools to check titers, to check vaccination status. So I do think that we have reasonably good vaccination rates. I think the gap, in my opinion, is really the perception and the awareness of the vaccine. I think a lot of adults don't even know that there is a vaccine out there, and that's why it's really important. Now, if you've taken your kid for most of their routine vaccinations to the pediatrician every year or what have you, chances are they're probably vaccinated and protected, including the kids from Eaglecrest High School. But if you're ever in doubt, like I said, just check with your pediatrician, because it is something they can check titers for. It is something they can check vaccination records for yourself and your family members.
How comfortable would you feel going back into that building?
That's an interesting question. I would say I would be guarded, for sure. I think they are doing a lot of cleaning and sanitation and those types of things. And like I said, it's not airborne like COVID, so it doesn't linger in the air. You can't get it just from passing somebody or from sort of breathing the same air. It really does require more prolonged close contact. So I'm not quite as worried as we were with some of the COVID, especially just with this one case. And we're not even entirely sure where she contracted it from. It could have been from somewhere else. And which organism. I'm really waiting to hear, is it that meningococcus or is it one of the other organisms that causes it? Because that also determines the infectivity.
Interesting. Anything else I'm not asking that you think is worth
No,
knowing?
I think this has certainly been alarming for our community, something we all want to pay attention to, but I also want to reassure everybody that I do think that we're taking all the public health measures. Just talk to your doctor about that vaccination if you haven't already.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the time chatting about this important issue.